We are a company that started in 1971 with one cafe in London, based around certain concepts that stay with us today, core values of our company. We've grown to today 38,000 team members around the world. We operate in 74 countries, and I'm happy to tell you, in those 74 countries, with 200 cafes, 13 casinos, and 18 hotels, and an expanding footprint here in China, that we have partners in 74 of those countries. It's interesting to note that in addition to casino hotels, of which the Tampa Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Tampa, Florida is the single most successful casino in America. It generates more revenue, EBITDA, and net income than any Las Vegas casino. And interestingly, on the other end of the spectrum, in Orlando, Florida, the Hard Rock, which is a non-casino hotel, is the single most successful hotel in Orlando, including more successful than any of the Disney hotels or the Ritz-Carlton, measured in every metric that a hotel person looks at, including occupancy, ADR, and RevPAR, 7 years in a row. And the last fun fact is that Hard Rock is one of the most recognized brands in the world, with more media impressions than Starbucks, United Airlines. And in 74 countries with 237 outlets, think of the cross-marketing possibilities that Hard Rock can provide to Japan. And we've been in business in Japan for 30 years. Getting into the heart of the matter, the chairman challenged us to bring some context, some experience, and some personal view and professional view in a subject matter that is perhaps the most controversial today. When Hard Rock makes a business decision, we are a conservative company by nature. We have one of the best balance sheets in the industry. Terrific credit ratings by all three rating agencies, the only casino hotel company in America with corporate rated bonds. And the challenge that we have when we make a decision is to try to understand what's the end result of the legislation? What business proposition does it present to our stakeholders and our investors? I would like to tell you that in this analysis, in this process of coming to the conclusion, do we want to invest in Japan and do we want investors in Japan? The answer, looking purely at the market, is of course yes, we do. But we also want to understand, what is this legislation going to look like from a businessman's standpoint? It is not meant to be critical in any way. We all have the same information. We know exactly what we've read in the newspaper about this next piece of legislation. So that's our starting point. So we made some assumptions from our 30 years of experience. Based on our collective experience globally, we've done this in more than one jurisdiction over the last 30 years, we had to ask ourselves some questions. And in that process, Daniel took on the challenge to presuppose the what-ifs. What if scenario A happens? What if scenario B happens? What if scenario C happens? So that's the contextual backdrop to our presentation today. And again, this is really Daniel's work product. He's put a lot of time into it to answer the very difficult questions that we have to ask ourselves as business people. So please keep in mind, in addition to pointing out some of the complexities that are really wrapped around this next piece of legislation, we also offer up suggestions, and they're just that, they're suggestions. And with that in mind, I will try not to confuse you. I will let the expert walk you through these slides and give you a little background as to what our thinking is and what our proposed solutions are. Mr. Daniel Chang. Thank you, Daniel.
So Japan Integrated Resort, we are finally halfway there. This has been more than 20 years in the making. And today we have seen the promotion law. We have seen some of the recommendations that have come out from the national government cabinet team. They have done quite a great and admirable effort at outlining the supposed IR legislation process. They have also lined up an impressive array of 8 very distinguished advisors to help with them, like one of them in our audience today, Maruta-san. I go back to the purpose of the JETRA organization and the purpose of this seminar, and Chairman Kimura and Jane has mentioned that the mission of JETRA is to provide the private sector and industry feedback back to the government as they plan this legislation. So to that very point, while the national government has so far come up with an admirable process, but if there's anything that's lacking, we would say that there's actually very little industry consultation, just based on the typical Japanese government process that is missing right now. So if we may, for the next 30 minutes in this forum, and Hard Rock as an industry representative of the IR operators out there, we want to give our analysis and some opinion of the current legislation. And then after that, maybe give you a view of what that might be done differently if with the right industry inputs from people like ourselves and SANS and MGM and all that. Most of you will be very familiar with the Plan IR process that resulted from the second IR advisory meeting about 2 months ago. So I would like to go through that very quickly and then share some opinions based on the perspective from the operator's viewpoint. As you know, in the current national government plan, the process starts at the local governments, where the local governments are supposed to solicit proposals from operators and consortiums. And then thereafter, after each local government have selected an operator, then they each have to team with the operator to submit a proposal to the national government. And in this process then, the national government will select both the location and the operator at the same time. And we can understand from the government viewpoint and perspective that that seemed to be a very logical process. But if we actually look at it from the private sector point of view, from an IR operator point of view, there are actually quite a number of issues out there that will present itself actually when the national government starts to detail out what the actual process is. So I'd like to spend the next few minutes to break that down for you, the current process, and when it comes from our point of view, what those flaws are. The first very glaring issue, which is now very well known after that report is out, is that we all know that the big metropolitan locations like Osaka or Yokohama is going to be much more attractive than the regional locations, and they are going to naturally attract more proposals than the regional locations. One of the national government reasons for this is because they said they want to leave the process to market forces, for the market to decide where's the best place they want to put their money in. But that is discounting the history of the last 10, 15 years, where a lot of regional governments have been led to believe that they have a chance to be one of the IR locations, and with this current change effectively wipe out the 10, 15 years of effort that all these local governments have put into this. The second point is, for an operator, preparing a bid for an IR is a very, very expensive process. So if I use the example of Singapore, the typical cost that each IR operator have to spend to prepare and submit a bid ranges between $5 and $10 million. So you will have a situation in Japan when all the local governments issue RFPs and the operators have to choose between which city to bid to and how many. You find that only the bigger companies like Sands or MGM or Hard Rock, which have enough capital, are able to submit 2 or 3 different proposals, but smaller, medium-sized operators will only be able to have the resource to do one. And another issue that is not explained yet in the government's report is that when all this RFP happens for each of the local government, is there a schedule? What if each city do their RFP all at the same time? So as an operator like me, Hard Rock, if I get a request from 3 cities at the same time, which one do I concentrate on? Which one do I have to give up? That is a very big issue that the operator have to think about. And what about the detail and quality of the RFP? Maybe a bigger city with more budget like Osaka can spend a lot of money, hire third-party consultant to write a very comprehensive RFP, a very high-quality one. But the smaller cities or the newer entrants like Wakayama may not have enough time and people and money to prepare a very good RFP. So you have a situation that different cities will have different quality of RFPs. And then when you go to the next step of the process, then there are also a number of issues. So if, for example, an operator bid for 2 locations and they win both, but it's quite likely that the law will not allow one operator to have 2 locations. The law is not out yet, but I'm quite certain that will be the case. In which case, the operator will have to say, I have to give up one, even though 2 governments want me. And very obviously, the operator is going to give up the one that is the smaller location. So this will be very disruptive for the local government that get rejected, right? So for example, if the operator is selected by Yokohama and Kyushu, right? Now the operator will go to Kyushu and say, sorry, I prefer Yokohama, so I decline your offer. So it means that now Kyushu have wasted all the time and process they have in selecting the operator, and now they have to select another backup operator just because of that. And because the current plan now does not distinguish between the bigger metropolitan cities and the local area, it is very obvious that there will be much more operators bidding for the metropolitan cities than the local area, because they have to be concerned about the next stage of the process, where they will think that the national government will now favor the metropolitan areas. So it means that the local areas may only attract very few bids. Some may even attract 1 bid, or maybe some locations don't get any bid at all. And now there's also a very big debate on what does an IR license actually mean. Is one IR license, does it mean 1 operator? Or does an IR license mean 2 or 3 operators? And we have been reading articles about Osaka and people calling it the Osaka Strip, because Yumeshima is such a big piece of land that can actually accommodate a few IR development. And the same goes for Tomakomai, who has almost 1,000 hectares of land. But with the national government leaving the first step entirely to all the local governments to work it out themselves, the local governments will not have enough knowledge and experience to even consider things like multiple operator integrated resort, because that is a really complex planning and organization process. And the same issue of leaving the local governments to start the first step by themselves is, many of us realize that depending on each location, some locations have very strong support and influence from private companies. Some is fully government driven. So the process for each location and the dynamics is very different. It creates a lot of transparency issue, and I think that is something that the national government don't really want to contend with, because in the past few years we know the national government try and shy away from a lot of all these political issues that have cropped up very frequently nowadays. But really the most difficult part that we struggle with is in this last step, when the local government and the IR operator have to jointly submit a proposal to the national government. So this becomes a case of a government and commercial bid combined together. This has never happened before in any jurisdiction in the world. And this presents the greatest issue because as an operator, we are a profit-driven company. All the focus on our bid is to have the best profit, the best return to our shareholder. But now we have a partner who is a local government, and the government is not a profit-driven organization. It's an organization for the people. It has social, national, and political objective. So you're combining this objective with commercial objective and try and work together to win a license. So maybe I ask all of you to think about that and consider the question. When the government and the operator bid together, who is the leader of the bid? Is it the government or is it the operator? And that's going to be different from location to location. In the bigger city, the government may be stronger and said, we want to control the proposal. In a smaller city, maybe the operator controls everything. And what about the funding? Which party provides the funding to prepare the proposal, which could cost $10 million? Is it all by the operator? Is it half-half? That's a lot of complicated questions that cannot be answered. And the last issue goes back to my earlier point about how expensive preparing an RFP is. But based on the current plan, basically every operator has to go through an RFP 2 times. So I may make a proposal to a local government, spend $10 million, and I win. And then we make a proposal together and spend another $10 million, and I lose. So I need to spend $20 million before I know whether I win or I lose. So again, this is never done before. Japan is the only country that have a 2-stage RFP process. I've never had any experience, or Ed in his over 30 years have never had any experience in any part of the world where you need to go through 2 RFPs to get an IR license. So we were told that part of the reasons for the current plan by the government was modeling after what the state of Massachusetts and the state of New York RFP process. But actually, if you look at the table on the screen, there are actually very, very salient differences between the environment in the US, those 2 states, and what is happening in Japan. So while it is said that they are modeling after that, but there are actually very, very big differences that make the application of the process for Japan not very applicable. But I just want to jump to how we think the IR process in Japan may look like if there had been more consultations with the IR operators and the private sector. Then we would have a process that would be principled on 4 key precepts. The first precept is we have to separate the political and commercial process. It is like oil and water. It cannot mix. There should be a system applied that there would be a standardized bid process across all the local government. And before any RFC or any RFP begin, the national government should provide a very clear articulation of what an IR license really means. And the views of all the operators, not just Hard Rock, is that really you should only conduct an RFP for locations that have already been selected by government. So in that scenario, we would see maybe a stage 1 process where we think maybe the national government should conduct what we call a pre-qualification of operators. Because I think we all feel that at the highest level, in the cabinet, in the national government, they already have an idea of what kind of operators they want in Japan. So if they do a pre-qualification process, then local governments may not be concerned about talking to medium or smaller size operators that the national government has no intent to license to. So if the national government goes through this pre-qualification process, then the local governments are now very clear. Only the operators that have been pre-qualified by the national government, they will only entertain inquiries from these operators. That makes the process for the local government much easier. And as I mentioned, before any RFC or RFP process begin, the national government should clarify what really entails an IR license. Questions like, will they set any minimum or maximum equity between foreign operator and local companies? Questions like, can an IR consortium consist of more than one operator? Questions like, are there any kind of organizations that would be excluded from a consortium, be it foreign governments or junket organizations, etc.? Because as I mentioned, especially the question of whether multiple operators can hold one IR license is, something that local governments like Osaka and Tomakoma is very interested to, get more clarity from the national government. And I will share with you a few examples of this kind of consortium around the world. So one of the most famous multi-operator IR is in Atlantic City, the Bogota Resort and Hotel. It is actually a joint venture between MGM Resorts and Boyd Gaming. Another example in Asia, as we all know, is the City of Dreams, which is a joint venture between Australia Crown Resort and Melco International. And yet another example is actually a Hard Rock joint venture project with Melco International, where we recently won a license for an integrated resort in Cyprus. And then some other points that the national government should clarify are also in regards to, like, what are the number of IR municipalities? They may not need to select the city location, but if they could articulate each region, how many licenses would be awarded, that would provide a fairer picture to the different type of local governments. Especially we feel that metropolitan locations and regional locations cannot be combined into one basket. They should be separately classified and have separate criteria. Then step 2 may be for all the interested local government to conduct what we call an RFC process, a request for consent process, which is what the Singapore government done 12 years ago, where the local government would invite IR operators like Hard Rock and other companies to offer their concepts as well as their projected investment in their area. Then the local government can take the best ideas of all the concepts, of all the proposals they receive, and combine together and create a final IR master plan for their location, including a commitment to investment now from various consortiums. Then we have the next step of the location selection process that does not involve the private corporation. Then each local government can submit their concept to the national government with all their economic, social, local goals, together with commitments of investment from that they have received during the RFC process. And the national government can then use these proposals as a criteria to select 1, 2, 3, or 4 local municipalities. This will reach us to the point where we are at the stage for the RFP process. And we think to have a standardized, transparent process, the national government should take the lead to prepare a single RFP document that would be applied and used by all the selected locations. And each local government may contribute an addendum specification that will cite requirements that are unique to their local conditions. Then in the RFP, now the local government can conduct the RFP, but with support from the national government, and then operators will only go through an RFP process once. So in this way, the same standardized RFP process can be applied to every location. And another point is that the RFP process should be conducted in a consecutive manner. So if 4 locations are selected, then RFP for each location will be done one after another. So this is to allow each location to get fair attention of all the operators, and this is the method that was also applied by the Singapore government. And when we analyze this process and we try to put a schedule around it, it would end up very similar, if not a little bit shorter than what is currently envisaged in the present plan. So for example, if the process begins sometime in the end of this year, say in November, the national government can conduct a 2 to 3 month pre-qualification process, inviting all operators to submit their credentials and their financial ability. So based on that, they could be sometime in April be able to provide a list of qualified operators that can now start talking to all the local governments. And then sometime in the middle of next year, then all the local governments can each begin their own RFC process, inviting only all the qualified companies to submit their concepts to them. An RFC proposal is a much more simpler proposal than an RFP because it's not a full detailed commercial development proposal. So usually an RFP process would only take 2 months, and this would allow the local governments to be able to receive proposals within 2 months and be able to consolidate all the inputs they receive and update their final master plan sometime by the end of next year. Then with each local government now having their final master plan as well as investment commitment from various operators, the national government can then conduct a location RFP in the first quarter of 2019. That will allow the national government to select the 2, 3, 4, or 5 locations based on the location RFP process by the middle of 2019. Then each of the selected locations can start their commercial RFP process consecutively from the middle of 2019, and depending on whether 3 or 4 or 5 location is selected, every one of them will take between 5 to 6 months before the next RFP begins. So by no means, this viewpoint that we present is meant to shorten the process. As you can see, the process would take probably as long, but it will eradicate a lot of issues that the national government and the cabinet team have not seen yet because they haven't gone to the next step of planning of what they want to do. And we're not saying by a long stretch that this is the best approach, but this is an approach that would take into consideration the viewpoint of the operators, and we hope that then with this platform and with organizations like JETRA, that can be tabled to the national government for consultation. I think I've eaten into some of your cocktail hour already, so thank you very much.